Hello, everyone. I'm here for Where I'm From 51 with Myriam Steinberg. Yay, Myriam. Thanks for joining me.
So happy to be
Um,
here.
I am reading Finding Me by Viola Davis. My mom recommended it, and I'm usually a little bit nervous about celebrity memoirs, but this one is truly incredible. I highly recommend it. So, what are you reading, Myriam?
I am reading The Ash Garden by Dennis Bach, and it's about one of the engineers who created the A-bomb
Oh, well.
and his life afterwards as an old man and his relationship with his wife.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's quite good.
Yeah, the repercussions of inventing something of that epic of proportions. They couldn't have
Yeah,
had any idea what they were doing.
yeah.
Um, so, is there anything you'd like to chat about before you read your poem, or do you just want to launch into it?
Let's launch into it.
Okay.
Some specific questions.
I am ready.
All right. So, I am from books, from Frog and Toad and Frogs on a Log. I am from behind the curtain of the darkening room, orange and purple skies, book on sill, heart beating, will I get caught? I am from lilacs and wisteria, jetting and dripping, bookending the garden. I am from La Hadligner Shel Shabbat and Big Noses, from Danny and Claudine, and from the silence and the power, from He's at another meeting and Mashta Salad. I'm from braiding talus fringes, enthralled, shofar blowing, cantor singing. I am from water and mountains, shtetls and bright lights, challah, black coffee and cigarettes. From the migraines, broken hips, faulty heart never stops going. My grandmother's say please and thank you distribution of Mandelbrot and raisin oatmeal cookies. Birth green and gooey remembered in old binders, photos of my babyhood in a box of Pampers, baby the size of the dog's head, baby's sorry.
That's all right.
Baby the size of the dog's head, toddler licking ice cream with much delight. I am from these moments, my world through my mother's eyes.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm also from Frog and Toad.
Oh,
I
nice.
love Frog and Toad.
That's the one book I remember my father sitting down with me and
Mm.
teaching me how to read.
Oh, that's really sweet.
That was
And those
cool.
books are so like they still kind of when I read them with my kids, I get a little choked up because there's something, I don't know. I think the author really shows through in the work and you feel him in it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, so what was your experience writing this poem?
So as soon as I knew I was going to be doing this, I sat down and wrote it right away.
Oh wow.
Um, I didn't want to kind of sit
Mhm.
and lose the train of thought on
Mhm.
it. And it was really interesting because there's stuff that came up that I was surprised that came up, and memories and sensations. And some of them were like, oh, do I say this? I feel
Mhm.
like I'm calling somebody out, but it was just such a real thing in my life and
Mhm.
um, really impacted how I navigate the world and
Mhm.
relationships now.
Mhm. And did you find that the prompt itself sort of like dug up different ways of expressing? That was something I noticed, like because I don't necessarily hit all the sensory details when I'm writing. Did you find that process interesting, where it made you think about things maybe in a different way?
It did. Like, for example, when I mentioned the lilacs and the wisteria,
Mhm.
like that's from my parents still live in that house.
Mhm.
Um, and they were really kind of markers of my time. They have a huge yard and just like so much playtime and like how to encapsulate that in a completely different way. Like I would never have thought to put that as the flowers, and they're both purple flowers.
It was
Um,
very evocative. I can
yeah,
imagine. I mean, I've been to Vancouver and it made me think it's very different foliage than here, even though we're on the West Coast. We're in
yeah,
very different parts of the West Coast and sort of that like not rainforest, but you know how abundant the green is there as
yeah,
opposed to here.
a lot of green.
Yeah, yeah. The rain will do that. And did you feel like you were writing from a specific age? Or like did it just come to you? Or did you feel like you were jumping around? Or was it, Miriam at age or 12 or
It was me as a kid for
Mhm.
sure. Probably the ages of between 7 to 12 kind of thing.
Mhm.
maybe a little bit older, but those definitely that age bracket is, I just like projected myself back to that.
Yeah. I, I, it's interesting how I think for me, and I think different people, it's like a very specific age. For me, it's like before certain life events happened, you know, because it was the sort of before and after, like before my brother died. I couldn't really write that along with, so I had to be before 10. Um, but um, any other thoughts about your experience?
Um,
No pressure.
well,
Did you just write it in one draft? Did you sit down and write it in one draft, or did you mess with it?
you know what? It was mostly in one draft. I
Mm-hmm.
fiddled with it a tiny little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly it was one draft. And I think I fiddled with it a little bit. I had sent it to you a couple
Mm.
days ago, but I fiddled with it a little bit since then. But yeah, no, mostly it was really the salient like sensory moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised at how just it was more sensory than than like, oh, this happened and then this happened and then this happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because for me, it's like the sound of the prayers or the feel of the fabrics, the smell and the visuals of the flowers. Everything was just, it made sound more like a concrete object that I'm talking about. But for me, as I'm writing it, it was really more about the look, the smell, the taste,
Mm-hmm.
um, and the emotion that went along with what I was describing.
Well, I think too, it's like the more specific we get, and we all know this as writers, the more specific we get, the sort of more universal, the more it breathes, the more it speaks to people. And I think as a, we're in co-writing together and we do other things, and writing and scene is something that comes up over and over again, and how important that is. And I think that this prompt is a good conduit for that, like
Mhm.
thinking, because I think sometimes people can get overwhelmed with like, well, how can I start the scene? But you can start a scene from the flowers or the feel of the cloth, or it can be the most kind of like a bare detail. It doesn't need to be a huge, you don't have to know the whole scene. You can get in there through the back door. And I think that this poem does a great job of it. It's done a really, for me, listening to these, once or twice a week for almost a year, it's a great reminder to me as a writer that I need to hook people. It doesn't need to be with some shocking twist. It can just be with, here's what I was experiencing. I mean, that's essentially
Mhm.
what we all want. So, um, as readers. So I don't know if you felt any of that or if it's reverberated at all through your writing, but it definitely has through mine.
Yeah, for sure. And like just to go back to the whole synagogue scene, it's like you were talking about it being a doorway into a bigger story. And that's like it was just like a moment of braiding the fringes, but it's like I could write essays
Mm-hmm.
about what it meant to me to be in synagogue with my dad, because my mom, she's Jewish, but she is not religious at all,
Mm-hmm.
and is rather atheist. Um, but like the friendship that I made and my relationship to Judaism now, and like being completely immersed and going from my dad to my grandmother. So it was like running across the whole entire synagogue because men and women were divided. Um,
Was it Orthodox?
yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in an
Yeah.
Orthodox. It was ironic because like I went to an Orthodox synagogue for the high holidays, but our day to day was
Was
very
not. Yeah.
secular,
Okay.
as it is with many Jews.
Yeah, but less so with Orthodox, right? Or no?
uh, so my dad's parents were quite religious
Mm-hmm.
and followed like all the rules, went to
Right.
synagogue every
Right.
week. So my dad, as he grew up, did all of that. And then he, in his 20s became a roaming hippie and
Mm-hmm.
became less religious,
Mm-hmm.
but he still holds a candle in his heart for it all and still goes to synagogue for the major holidays. And um, we still have Shabbat dinner every Friday night. So I still hear the
Such a
prayers when we
beautiful
can.
tradition.
It
I
really is.
think it's such
Yeah.
a lovely thing to gather with
Yeah.
family once a week and just make that space for that.
For sure.
Yeah. And here you are reading this poem right in the midst of the high holidays.
Yeah, tomorrow's Yom Kippur.
So it
Yeah,
felt very apropos. I was like, wow, okay,
yeah.
let's talk about it. Because I didn't know if you'd write it. I mean, thought you would probably write about being Jewish, but you never know. People
Yeah.
surprise me. So, and then when you were talking about braiding that talus, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Is that Orthodox or is that
So
any?
all Jews wear a prayer
Okay.
shawl. So a talit is like a prayer shawl. It
Okay.
is the prayer shawl. So all Jews during a service will wear one. All male Jews specifically. And if
Okay.
you're more in the like Reconstructionist or more liberal, then
Mhm.
often women will wear
Women
one
will
too.
too.
But
Mhm.
definitely Orthodox and ultra Orthodox, it's only the men.
I
Yeah.
like to learn things during these poems, so thank you.
You're welcome.
um, let's see. Well, can you tell me about your book that you've published, and then what
Yeah.
book you're working on? Your memoirs?
I don't have catalog baby on me.
What?
Well, I do, but I have to go and run and get it. I could do that.
Go run and get it. Show it to
Really?
us since it's a graphic. Yeah, it's a graphic memoir. Let's see
Okay.
it.
Clear it back.
So, yeah, so I'll talk more about this book, Finding Me by Viola Davis, which um, I read Acceptance by Emmy Neatfield right before this, and both books are so much about growing up and living in poverty, and I found them to be really powerful. And no one should have to live and grow up in poverty. Both books make that case very strongly. So let's see your book.
All right. So this is catalog baby. Better lady.
Yes, your graphic memoir, which is a
That
huge
graphic.
accomplishment. I mean, any memoir is, but a graphic memoir, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was huge. So
Yeah.
it catalogs my journey, my fertility journey,
Hmm.
my life through miscarriages and pregnancy losses of various kinds. And I'm not going to give the ending away. You'll just have to get the book.
Well, what's your next book about? That might give it away.
Listen. Trixie,
I just want to
Trixie.
say though, I this is a conversation I feel like I've been having more recently. I think because of Roe v. Wade, because of it getting overturned, people are talking more and more about how no one should be forced to give birth to a child and miscarriages and how people aren't getting essential health care around their miscarriages because the doctors and the healthcare teams are concerned that it will look like it was assisting an abortion. And I'm grateful that you wrote a book about this stuff because I feel like we don't, as women, talk enough about our miscarriages and the fertility journey. Even those of us who I would say I had a pretty like typical one, you
Mhm.
know, but I had miscarriages, and I didn't want to like hurt. I didn't want to like upset other people by talking about mine. You know, I didn't want to because when someone's pregnant, you certainly don't want to say, "Well, I hope it all goes well." You know, like
Yeah,
that's not what
yeah,
anyone wants to hear.
yeah,
So then where do you put those stories that you don't want to like upset anyone with, which is a greater question for what do we do with those stories? But I love that
yeah.
you wrote a book about all this because I think it's really important.
Well, I needed those resources, especially because I went through it as a single mom by choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to rally my community around me, but like that was emotional support in terms of logistics, in terms of like, what do I do with this grief? What do I do with the
Mm-hmm.
physical pain of it all and the decisions I had to make? The resources were not there in a way that really spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like either it was like little snippet vignettes that were completely out of context,
Mm-hmm.
or it was these medicalized pamphlets or
Mm-hmm.
books that are like, well, that feels cold.
Right. And
And
it has
like,
nothing attached, no personal experience attached to it. It's more just clinical, like here's some
exactly,
statistics, you know, X amount of pregnancies end in miscarriage, you know, which is
right.
a cold comfort. But it doesn't really, you know, oh, okay, I'm not alone. So
Yeah,
that
and it
feels
doesn't
better,
like the
but
statistic doesn't change the fact that
right,
I'm grieving,
right.
right? And that
Yes, yes,
thousands, millions of other women are as well.
yes.
Um, and so I mean, there are more personal stories that have been published since then. But like 8, 9 years ago, when I started my journey, there was pretty much nothing out there that I could see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I hit like 2, 3 years into my journey, that's when I was really like, oh, this is a story that needs to be told.
Well, and it
Um,
seems like it's in groups. At least I hear of different people who are struggling with fertility. Like they might be in a Facebook group where people are talking about this stuff. But like if you're not in that, you know, because I was recently
yeah.
a friend of mine is writing about her miscarriage that was she almost bled to death. but she didn't know because she couldn't really find narratives talking about specifically what someone goes through when they're having a miscarriage.
Right.
It would be like, oh, you bleed. But so, okay, like how much? Like,
Well,
how
and
much
it's
are we
like,
talking about here? And then I told that to another friend, and she was like, oh, well, I'm in a Facebook group because she's going through the fertility journey,
yeah,
so she has that kind of, but this first friend was just got pregnant,
yeah,
so she wasn't in a Facebook group. Um,
right. So yeah, it's true. It's like, and everything you see on social media, it feels like there's nothing out there until
mhm.
you find that secret little club
Yeah.
of folks who are having issues with miscarriage and
Mhm.
infertility, and it's really, really challenging.
Mhm.
Um and even like you're talking about, how much do you bleed? Oh, you will bleed, but sometimes you don't bleed,
Right. And see, even that,
right?
like just the whole like spectrum of experiences. I told her when I was reading, because I have had miscarriages, when I was reading it, I was crying. And my
Yeah.
husband's like, are you okay? But yes, I'm just reading this essay because she so viscerally described very similar to some of the experiences I
Mm,
have that I'd never read.
yeah.
Just like it can be a lot, and it
Yeah.
can be feel like material of a person that it was
Yeah.
going to be.
Yeah.
And that is heartbreaking. Um, but yeah, you can't really bring that up at like your play date with your other kid, or just with your friends who aren't having children or aren't going through that, and you just don't know.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's, and I understand why these groups are private because the material is so emotionally vulnerable, and a lot of people don't
Mhm.
want to share that stuff publicly. But it is important for people to raise their voices and share this stuff. So anyway, pat on the back that you did, Miriam,
Oh,
because I
thanks.
know it's meaningful to a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to normalize that conversation where it
Yeah,
doesn't feel weird to be
right.
like, oh, actually this happened to me. And oh, you bump into a mom friend at the park and you're like devastated because you just lost a
Right.
baby. And like,
Right.
why can't it be okay for you to bring it up?
I
Like,
think we're
it's
all like worried
awkward
about
and it's weird.
contaminating other people with our grief. I will say, as a person who's
Yeah.
experienced a lot of grief, and I think some
Yeah.
people have pushed me away. So I like worry about contaminating people. I did tell people, but especially with the second one, because I had a child already.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember sitting in a playgroup and just like quietly crying as all these kids were playing around me because I was like, oh, I might be done, which is
Oh my
great and
God.
fine. And I love my child, but like, oh, this might be it. And yeah, just kind of.
That totally happened to me too. Yeah.
And I know that when you're going through the journey, everyone is pregnant. Like that's how
Yeah.
you feel. So you just look around at all these fertile women and think like, why not me?
Yeah.
And and that's when the statistics don't do much
Yeah.
because no one's sharing with you how they got through it.
Yeah. Exactly. Unless you open up about it first. But then you have
Pretty
to have that
much.
awkward moment.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, like chicken or the egg.
Right. I mean, I'm a fan of awkward moments because I think lots of times good things come out of them. And
Yeah.
probably if you don't want to have these conversations, I'm probably not your friend. Like, we're probably not going to be friend material. So it's okay. But it's taken me a long time to get there.
Yeah.
And a lot of women going through these issues are really young and they're not there yet. They don't feel comfortable. I mean, especially I think, I remember women who got pregnant when I was younger and they didn't really want the baby, but they had a miscarriage. And so that's a whole other set of, like there's a lot.
I mean, there's so many levels. I
Hmm.
got pregnant and I didn't want to when I was like 31 or something, and I
Hmm.
had an abortion.
Hmm.
And I don't regret it
Right. Because it was what was right for you.
because it was what was right for me at the moment.
Hmm.
And then like fast forward 10 years where I wanted to be with somebody who was right for me,
Hmm.
and that just didn't materialize. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, well now I really I know I'm ready for that kid now. Like, this is it. I'm
Yeah.
good. Like,
Yeah.
and so what do you do? And no, like nothing prepared me for what I was about to go through. Um and I'm like, I'm just so grateful for the community that I had around me. I'm grateful that, I mean, even writing Catalog Baby helped me get through it because I actually started writing it before the end of the journey.
Hmm.
Like, I didn't know what the ending was going to be.
Hmm.
I actually had to change the ending before we went to the final edits.
That's
You know,
nice.
yeah,
Community is so important.
it's so important.
Yeah. And I think that as was just talking to a friend who moved and she's like, oh, I haven't done much this year. I'm like, well, you moved your whole life. That's a big deal, severing, all of this
Yeah.
and then trying to build it again in another place. I think we sort of gloss that over,
Hmm.
community, and it takes time to build it. It's not an instant thing.
It really
Um,
does.
yeah.
It's like I worked hard,
Yeah.
so hard at building it up, and just like, and thank God I did, because compassion fatigue is a thing,
Yeah.
right? Like you're
Yeah.
going through so much and you're going through it
Yeah.
year after year after year after year. And like some people are just like, oh,
Yeah.
just, I can't, I just can't. I love you, but I can't.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
So like I had to kind of find resources and very like
Mhm.
talk to different friends about different aspects of it and
Mhm.
just try not to overload folks with what I was going
That's
through.
such an important point, Miriam. I have not, I mean, I have heard compassion fatigue, but I hadn't really let it sink in. But it's so true. I was talked to a lot of friends about these things, but we were talking about that thing where you have a close friend and you want to share yourself with them, but you also acknowledge and know that they have their own life that they're dealing with,
Yeah.
and so you have to, if it's a truly close friendship, you value them and their own mental health,
Yeah.
and you want to share these pieces of yourself, but you can't just unload on them all the time. I mean,
You
it's
can't.
just not feasible,
Yeah. And
you
you
know?
can't make it the only topic of conversation either.
Right, right,
Right?
right. So
Because
if
that
they
can
see your
happen.
name, they're like, oh boy, here
You know,
we
like you
go.
it can, when you're in this whole like black
Yeah.
hole of infertility and loss, it's like
Mhm,
that just becomes so consuming that you forget
mhm.
that there's other stuff to
But you
talk
can
about.
talk about Game of Thrones. That's the other book Miriam's reading.
Oh, it's not Game of Thrones, it's the
No,
prequel
it's the no, I
or
know, but
something,
it's
but it's
whatever.
really bad. Don't read it.
It's like essentially a
No.
history or whatever. I'm like, no. It's what the show's based on that's on right now, right?
I don't
The
know.
House of Dragon. Yeah, I think it is. It's just like a it talks about like what happened before Game of Thrones, but just like kind of quickly, right? Like
Yeah, this is like 100 years before or something
right.
like
Yeah, I think it's what the show that's on right now is
that.
about.
Okay.
Yes, which I don't know. I have mixed feelings about Game of Thrones, but
So do I.
it's it's important to be able to talk about that, which is the point we're making. Like,
Great.
you talk about infertility and loss, or your grief, or like if you're struggling with a diagnosis, or I mean, we all have different things that we struggle
Mhm.
with at different times, but then you also, yeah, need to be able to talk about less weighty things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it,
And
it takes skills.
it does. And like kind of harkening back to the poem, like I talk about, so all the broken hips and the heart and all that stuff, that's a lot of stuff that my mom has been going through like all my life. I've never seen her not in pain for something. And um but she doesn't talk about it. And there's like this balance that needs to be made
Mhm.
between like allowing somebody into your life and your emotions and also finding joy and
Mhm.
um, finding support and asking for support. Um, yeah, I feel like my brain is kind of like exploding right now. Is like I'm
I
trying to
think
like
that's,
put my thoughts in order, but
but I think that makes a lot of sense with the poem and with your book and with, I think that that is the other temptation, right? Like that it's difficult sometimes to find that middle ground where I think for those of us, I think really everyone at some point in their life has something that they don't know if they can speak about.
yeah,
And I think sometimes it can feel easier just not to speak about it because we're
yeah,
afraid if we start, we won't be able to stop.
yeah.
Um, and
And I'm
so,
yeah. And I was scared to kind of go into that space of not sharing because I see how it's affected my mom.
oh, that's a really
And
powerful point.
yeah, and I also see how it's affected her and I's relationship
Right.
and our ability to speak to each other. Like we love each other very deeply, but our ability to speak to each other about intimate things is like it's hard.
Right. Because once you start to cordon off parts of yourself, it's difficult. I mean, you can't really pick and choose. That's something I've come to realize with age that, if I'm not dealing with the pain, then I'm also not getting the joy.
Yeah,
Like you're kind of just living in the middle. Um,
absolutely.
so I think that's also true with intimacy, right? like if you're not sharing those parts of yourself, you're probably not sharing as much of the joy either. Like you're kind of living in the middle.
Yeah.
Which I think can feel pretty great when you're living in the dumps, so I get like it's a process that you
Yeah. Yeah.
can integrate all these things, because I certainly was like, living in the middle is great, I could do that, and then eventually it's like, oh, I actually want to like be able to experience these joyful things and breathe
Mhm.
them in, and
Yeah.
not just be like, that's something joyful going on over there, noted, like I want to actually
Oh my
take it
God.
in.
Nailed it.
Yeah. So it's a journey, it really is. And I do think, I mean, it's interesting to hear what you say about writing Catalog Baby, because I definitely, whenever I'm having doubts about writing my story or working on this book, I think like, well, this is for me. Like,
Mhm.
even if it's just for me and my like 5 friends who will love it, then that's actually worthwhile.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for me,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
it's helping me not go noted and breathe it in, who I am and what I've lived through and what I feel about life. And that's what I
Yeah.
love about this poem and these conversations. Like I think it brings into focus like how important these things are, where we came from and what built us. Like if we don't
Mhm.
acknowledge them, we can't really work with them. So
Yeah. Agreed.
well, any other last thoughts before we wrap up? This has been such a lovely conversation, Miriam. We
Yeah.
always see each other, but we don't actually talk that much. So this has been a treat for me.
Yeah. Me too. I really
So
appreciate it.
yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot, and I loved your poem. And anything else you want to say?
Um, I'm working on the sequel to Catalog Baby, which I'm very excited about,
Yes.
and crossing fingers I get the publisher I want.
I hope you do too. Well, your Catalog Baby's won a lot of awards. I'd like to
It
believe that
has.
will help in some way.
I
Miriam's
hope
a big
so.
award winner.
I got the trifecta.
Yeah, that's right. Well, fingers crossed. I'm excited for
Thanks.
you either way. Thank you again for joining me, Miriam, and I'll see you again soon on Zoom, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
Allison.
Thank
All
you.
right.